All right. Well, we'll give it a minute or two for people to come in, but welcome everyone. Really excited to be having this webinar today, Friday, August 1st, beginning of Q3, and the beginning of a beautiful, beautiful day here in California. I've got my friend Christopher Gergen with us. And like I said, we'll kick it off in a minute. I'll just give it another few seconds for people to join us. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Um, well, welcome everyone. My name is Charlie Doobie. I'm the head of regenerative partnerships here at Agrology. Really excited about this webinar today with Christopher Gergen, who's the CEO of the Regenerative Organic Alliance. I'll let him give himself a more thorough and detailed intro in a second here. But just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. We will be recording this, and we'll be sending out the recording in an email later this afternoon or on Monday at the latest. We'll also include Christopher's slides. But we really love these things to be super interactive. So please go ahead and put any questions you have or comments into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to those questions. The general format for today is I'll let Christopher intro himself and then give kind of an overview of the Regenerative Organic Alliance and their work. And then we'll jump into some questions from Agrology side, and then we'll go into a Q&A and we'll see where it goes from there. Looks like we already got a lot of great questions from Ethan. Yeah, Christopher, turn it over to you.
All right, Charlie. It's great to be with you and with this growing group of folks from across the country and maybe around the world. And you and I first had a chance to meet a few months ago when I was maybe in my third week as the CEO of ROA when we were out in wine country together. And uh, for those of folks who don't know, one of the categories that's really growing for us is wine. So it's really fun to be out in the wine country together and talking about regenerative organic agriculture and really thinking about how agrology is providing the kind of data that we need to be able to tell important stories about why regenerative organic is so important for folks. So I'm excited for this conversation and to see where it goes. And like you said, let's try to make this as interactive as possible. Maybe for introduction, as I mentioned, I am new to the ROA. I became the CEO in March. I come from a background of scaling high impact systems change organizations. So it's been really fun to come to ROA at this inflection point, which we'll talk about in a few minutes about where are we in terms of the growth of the movement and where the regenerative organic um, community is at this stage of the game. It's amazing how fast it's grown, how quickly. So it's incredible to be part of a growing group of team members that's really leaning into this movement, and we call ourselves the Regenerative Organic Alliance because we really are a movement building organization that works very closely with a whole bunch of different stakeholders from the producers themselves to brands to funders to consumers to retailers, all of whom are really committed to this idea of how do we transition from conventional agriculture to regenerative organic growing practices. So I'm pumped to be here and excited for the conversation.
Awesome. Well, like I said, if folks want to just keep putting questions or comments in the chat, and then Christopher, do you have any slides to maybe to just start us off and give us that high level overview? All right,
Yeah, that sounds great. So
perfect.
let me just throw these up here right now. So folks should be able to see that. Got
Yep.
it, Charlie? Awesome. So for those who are not familiar with the Regenerative Organic Alliance and Regenerative Organic Certification, this this organization started back in 2018, and it really started because there were a group of folks who said, we love the organic principles that a growing number of producers and brands are leaning into, but we feel like it maybe is not sufficient. And we recognize the fact that there are other things that we need to capture as we think about changing our growing practices away from conventional. and we want to create a new standard called the Regenerative Organic Certification. And it was really designed to say, hey, how are we trying to move away from synthetic inputs, but also how are we paying attention to soil health and recognizing the fact that 7 of the 10, for example, lowest paying jobs in America are in agriculture. So long history of labor exploitation, animal welfare abuse, or animal abuse. So the question is like, how can we start to address these critical questions that conventional agriculture is really driving, like a third of our greenhouse gas emissions, 70% of our fresh water use, 60% reduction of biodiversity because of our agricultural practices, and turn our growing practices from a negative to a positive where we can actually do things differently that are going to lead to a better planet and to better health in terms of where we're going. So the Regenerative Organic Certificate was started, the organization was started in 2018. The standard came online in 2020. And it was built on this organic foundation, like I mentioned, because that is a really important part of who we are. It's our part of our middle name. But then we wanted to add three other pillars to it. One was really focused on this idea of creating a standard around soil health and how do we think about ways to be able to be really intentional about increasing, for example, organic matter in the soil, being able to do more with biodiversity, water conservation, thinking about ways to be able to move away from GMOs and gene editing. And then also add a pillar around animal welfare and moving away from CAFOs and really leaning into more grass-fed, pasture-raised animals that are integrated into our ecosystem. And then finally, on the social fairness piece of this, how do we help recognize farms that are paying livable wage to their workers and are really thinking about being able to create more democratic, uh, good working condition farms that really are about the broader economic empowerment and welfare of these rural economies. So that makes up what the Regenerative Organic Certification is all about. Um, we'll talk a lot more about this, but the reason it was established is really to try to achieve these kinds of outcomes that we really bracket into three major things: the environmental benefits, the economic benefits, and the nutritional/health benefits that come along with regenerative organic growing practices. And since we launched, it really is about trying to make a clear distinction between what's considered conventional agriculture, and then we might get into this, but there's a lot of confusion around regenerative and regenerative conventional or regenerative non-organic. I personally think that that's a paradox, that if you are calling yourself regenerative and you're still using synthetic inputs, that's not regenerative by its very definition and its very nature. And then really moving towards regenerative organic, which we again feel like is the gold standard for this work. Um, since we launched in 2020, we've seen unbelievable growth. Like we talked about at the very beginning of the call, we've got now over 65,000 farms across 45 countries that are now regenerative organic certified, that are providing product to more than 300 brands and creating more than 2,500 products in the marketplace. And we'll talk a lot more about the growth of demand and where things are going in terms of the consumer marketplace. But that's really where we see the need is to continue to grow demand, grow awareness, and be able to pull through that supply. The way we work also is that we are a standards holder, and then we work with certifying bodies like many are probably familiar with CCOF or Control Union or EcoCert, uh, that are the certifiers themselves. So we are third-party verified, third-party certified, which means that we have the standard, but that our certifying bodies go out with their auditors onto the farms and be able to make sure that those farms are actually adhering to the regenerative organic standards. And then they go ahead and make a recommendation on the certification, and then we go ahead and recognize that certification. So when I say 65,000 farms are certified, they have gone through this certifying process with an independent auditor. And same thing with brands that are licensed. You have to be, in order to get a rock product, you need to have a minimum threshold of 70% of your product actually be rock in order to get the rock license. We also have a growing amount of work happening not just in food, but also in cosmetics and textiles. And in some cases, those like cosmetics, for example, use made with rock ingredients. Same thing often with textiles. In some cases, it's 100% of their product is rock. Some cases, it's a percent of that. So that's how we generally operate. I'm going to pause there just to make sure that see if you've got any questions or if anybody in the audience has any questions. I'm not able to look at the chat at the same time, so Charlie, if you can.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think there's a lot of questions, but none specific to what you were pointing out right there that I can see, although I'm still
Okay.
sorting through them.
Cool. All right. Well, let me keep rolling, and then what I'd like to do is just basically frame this conversation up, and then we can dig into any one of these sort of backgrounds and areas.
That sounds
It
perfect.
gives you a sense of our global footprint. It's what I love about this, about what we do at ROA and my role in particular is really thinking about the supply and demand of all of this. Most of our brands, most of our demand is in North America and in Europe. So we have a growing number of brands, for example, in Europe. We're about to launch a pretty significant initiative there to accelerate the regenerative organic movement in Europe. But it's sourced not just from, for example, North American farms and some European farms, but also some really interesting, like we do a lot with coffee and cocoa, for example, or we have this really interesting project around with true moringa, for example, to be able to preserve the moringa trees in West Africa. So there's some very interesting things that are going on. We work, like I mentioned, increasingly in textiles, and there's a big push right now around regenerative organic cotton farming in India. So there's a lot of really interesting sort of global supply demand relationships around the world. One of our big footprint areas is with Hewitt Ranches, for example, which is in Australia. They have 17 million acres of land in Australia that has been converted to regenerative organic growing practices, and they are the source of the beef for Applegate's rock hot dogs, for
Mhm.
example. So some pretty interesting things that are going on there. And where you and I first connected, as I mentioned, we've got 23 wineries in Sonoma, Napa, and Mendocino, which is pretty fun too. So there's all sorts of interesting categories about where this goes. This is also what's exciting about this is it's the fastest growing category within the natural foods uh, stores like Whole Foods, Sprouts, PCC. We do some work with the Infra Group, which is the Independent Natural Food Retail Association. So we've got a whole bunch of very cool independent retailers that really leaning into rock. So this is data from Nielsen IQ and Spins, which is showing that rock is growing year over year about 24%. So really quick growth on a relatively small basis. So we want to make sure that these trends continue over time. But this is really, I think, a reflection of the fact that there is growing consumer awareness, consumer demand for being able to buy rock product. There's more and more rock product that's coming online. Um, and so we see because of that demand and because of that growth, a lot of retail interest in trying to do more to be able to um, stock regenerative organic product and be able to promote it and to try to continue to help to grow that, have that grow. So we're really focused now. I mentioned earlier that we're at this incredible inflection point. We've got a ton of momentum right now, growing number of brands, growing number of producers, strong retail engagement, growing consumer awareness. And so we're hoping to build on this momentum. And we've set a goal for ourselves of trying to see if we can get to 10 million more acres of land transition to regenerative organic growing practices in the next 5 years, which we think it's very achievable. There's a lot of very cool, very big projects. So we work with a lot of smallhold farmers, but we also work with some larger operations, and we work with a lot of cooperatives. So often, like for example, in coffee, for example, work with a coffee cooperative that may have, several hundred coffee producers that are all have all transitioned to regenerative organic certified. So this is our goal. And so the question is, how do we get there? What's the strategy to get there? And this is this flywheel concept that we've been trying to lean into. one of the very clear things that we hear from farmers that we talk to, that there are three major barriers to transitioning to regenerative organic: cost, knowledge, and market. And so, one of the very clear things we hear from a lot of farmers, and I know that this is something we want to dig into in this conversation, is there a clear demand signal? Are brands willing to make commitments, forward contracts to be able to buy regenerative organic product, and are they willing to pay a premium for it? And so, a huge part of our work at Regenerative Organic Alliance is how do we drive demand? How do we drive as much demand as we possibly can and try to help our current brands source more rock product and then be able to help more brands come into the rock community with additional SKUs to be able to buy as much of that as possible to be able to create that clear demand signal. And once we create that clear demand signal, then you're able to increase the amount of supply to be able to meet that demand. So we do a lot of work with partners like Rodale Institute, which is one of our founding organizations, and other TA providers and certifying bodies to be able to make sure that we're building a strong pipeline of supply to be able to meet that demand. And then, Charlie, you and I will be talking more about that, capturing the impact that this transition is having from an economic, environmental, and health perspective, and being able to do more around data capture, but importantly, data translation and amplification around data-driven storytelling to be able to then drive more demand. Like, how do we help to capture that impact, tell that story, bring it to consumers, bring it to brands, bring it to retailers to be able to increase demand, which then creates more opportunities for supply, which then creates more impact, which then drives more demand, and that creates that flywheel that we're leaning into. So I'll move this through this relatively quickly because again, I want to get to a conversation on this, but I think it helps to frame it up. So like, what are we doing specifically on each of these categories? So as I mentioned before, a big focus for us right now, we have 314 brands that are sourcing rock. We'd really love to see that number go up dramatically around the world, here in the US and then also globally. For example, we set a target, for example, in the next 5 years to get 100 more brands in Europe. We really want to get consumer education tuned up. There's still some confusion in the marketplace when people walk in and be like, regenerative, organic, I don't get the difference. So we need to be able to make sure that there's really clear consumer awareness for and demand for this, and do that through the retail partners that we work with. And so there's a lot of good education storytelling that we're really supporting. As we grow the retail side of this equation, we also think that there are some really meaningful opportunities in the wholesale space, specifically around farm to school and food as medicine. As people become more aware, especially of the health benefits of this food, and they recognize the fact that this food is healthier and safer than conventional alternatives, not only will individuals, we think, be interested in being able to buy that for themselves and for their families through retail channels, but like school districts are going to say, hey, what are the kinds of food that we want to be putting on these kids' plates? And there's already efforts underway, thanks to the Alice Waters Institute and others, that are really trying to advocate for better food procurement focused on regenerative organic sourcing. And then increasingly, people are recognizing the tie between our food and our health. And what we have seen consistently is conventional agriculture is leading to really high rates of obesity and diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And that's got meaningful costs to society. And so, are there ways, and there's efforts underway already? 15 states at this stage of the game actually have waivers to use Medicaid dollars to be able to do these food as medicine programs to prescribe healthy food to food insecure communities. And by being able to do that through regenerative organic food, we feel like there's going to be some really nice ways to be able to help to source regenerative organic food with our healthcare systems paid for by Medicaid to food insecure communities to be able to reduce the cost of serving those communities in the long run by not having to have hospital visits, medication, et cetera, because they've got access to this healthy, nutritious, nutrient dense food. And that brings a lot of public policy and thinking about the advocacy component of that. So these are the kinds of investments that we're looking to make is to increase the ways that we can support our brands and be able to do more retail engagement. We just hired a new brand engagement manager, for example, to do more with public policy and think about these wholesale channels. At the same time,
Can I
go
ask a quick
ahead,
question,
Charlie.
Christopher?
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
just a specific one on that. Are you like literally creating a marketplace and kind of how are you matching brands with producers? And like what does that look like in terms of the nuts and bolts?
Yeah, so we actually do have uh, a great member of our team, Melania Lindquist, for example, who is a farm brand liaison. So
Mhm.
we are doing product road mapping with our brands to be able to understand what are their needs and then be able to do matchmaking with our producers to be able to say, oh, okay. Like, for example, we're talking to a beverage company right now that really needs different types of juices that they want to incorporate into their supply chain. And so being able to really look at what are good rock supply for what they're trying to do. We've got some pretty interesting conversations going on with some of the row crops to be able to provide some good market opportunities from that in that arena. So yeah, so brands are, they're thinking a long way out about where they're trying to go with their
Mhm.
rock roadmap, and our goal is to try to do some of that matchmaking. Same thing as we know, hey, there's these farmers have, some additional supply. We've got all these relationships with brands, and then we're able to then connect the dot and say, oh, okay, there's an excess amount of inventory for this particular crop or from this particular producer, and we try to find market opportunities for them, and we're trying to do a lot more with that. It's a
That's
big,
great.
big area for us.
Yeah.
Um, so, as we think about driving demand, we want to think about, again, reducing the barriers for farms to be able to make that transition and think about being able to reduce the cost of transition, be able to access some of the funds that are out there to be able to do like cover cropping and being able to do more with pollination and riparian zones. And there's some interesting, sources of capital out there. So we're trying to get farms connected to that capital. We also connect them to TA support, like I mentioned with Rodale and other consulting groups that are out there to be able to do this transition, ideally be able to reduce the cost of certification, and ideally make that free. It's one of the things we're trying to do right now is to raise this pool of capital. We're calling them Regenerative Organic Farmers Fund to be able to raise capital, to be able to provide support to farms to be able to make that transition to regenerative organic certification and get access to that technical assistance and support. And we're trying to do that in various regions. And then really making sure that we are continuing to make sure that our standards are rigorous, high integrity, but also relevant to the marketplace. So we're constantly working on our standards and evolving them based upon input from farms that we work closely with. And we've got a whole review process through our external review committee structure, which is a lot of fun. And we also are doing a lot more with peer-to-peer learning. So, for example, we had a great event right before Expo West where we worked with the Ecology Center just outside of Anaheim to be able to bring people together on a regenerative organic farm and to be able to learn more about the farming practices, but also stimulate opportunities for shared learning between farmers. And so we want to try to do a lot of that peer-to-peer, and there's increasing amount of activity focused on that. And then finally, this idea of like, how do we amplify impact, which I know is of real interest here, is how do we make sure that we are able to capture not just the outputs, like how many farms, how many brands, how many products, but actually what are the environmental, economic, and health benefits of transition to regenerative organic. Um, so we work really closely with some data partners. So we just signed a market channel partnership with Edacious, which has a food lab, and they have the ability to be able to bring food into their lab, be able to test it around both its nutrient density and its toxicology. So looking at like pesticide residue and be able to
Mhm.
look at that and contrast to the same conventional product. And what early evidence shows is that regenerative organic food is not only more nutrient dense, it's also toxin free And that's, we think, a really compelling story and could be a real unlock to be able to grow, again, consumer awareness of and demand for regenerative organic. And then, to the agrology point, like how do we make sure that we're capturing this environmental data and looking specifically at things like carbon and soil and biodiversity and water retention. And that's got benefits on two fronts. One is that we think that we have the ability to be able to help farms package that up and ultimately, we hope, get credit for that and be able to get paid for it. But also, what we see, and Charlie, through your work with all the farms that Agrology works with, is that farms see a real benefit, not just in terms of being able to tell that external story, but they see that as they are transitioning to regenerative organic growing practices, that they tend to be more resilient. Their cost of
Mhm.
inputs go down, the quality of the product goes up. So we want to make sure that we're capturing that data as well so that farms understand the full value proposition that comes along with it. One, that they're producing food that is more nutritious, can demand a premium in the marketplace. It's got positive environmental and economic benefits that we believe that people should ultimately be willing to pay for, whether it's in setting or whether it's through, at some point, ecosystem support services. And then also by being able to do that transition, that at the end of the day, it actually makes the farm more resilient and have lower cost of input in the
Mhm.
process. And our ability to be able to take that data, translate that data, and bring that data out to the marketplace to a variety of stakeholders, we think is going to be super important. And so we're doing a lot more with data, trying to work a lot closer with the data partners like Agrology, and saying, hey, how do we tell that story? So that's sort of where we are. I'll stop there, and we know we're trying to do some of this kind of stuff in very specific regions. We got this cool initiative that we're trying to roll out in the Midwest, for example. But I'm going to stop there and figure that we can get into other things as we go.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that was a really good kind of cue up and I think set a really solid context for us to dive into this conversation. And there's all kinds of great questions coming in. So I'm going to kind of ping pong between my questions and some questions from our audience here, our global audience. Um, So my first question is really kind of digging in a little bit deeper on that market creation piece. And I think you did a really good job framing it up, but I'd love to kind of dive into the details. In my view, I think at this moment, talking about that flywheel, it seems like there's always going to be kind of one piece that maybe is lagging behind the other ones. And in my personal opinion, it seems like growing demand right now is probably the biggest challenge for regenerative agriculture as sort of a movement. And I've heard this from almost every grower that I work with that has a regenerative program. They say, I'd be happy to grow, to expand my acreage and to grow more if only I could find a market that was willing to buy those goods. And I think there's some amazing work that's been done and continues to be done on the sort of the push factor, right? So like the education for farmers, social proof, exploring these claims and really proving them out that there's better profitability because of these input costs. But I really feel like there's a lot more development that could be done on the pull factor of creating that really, that market where there's a large demand. Ideally, we always have, slightly outpacing demand versus supply. And on top of that, I think one thing I'd love to explore is I feel like we need a market that's not only hungry to pay for regenerative organic goods, but that's willing to pay a fair price. And in my view, that should be a premium above both organic and conventional produce. I know that we can definitely create cost savings through, reduced input costs and et cetera, et cetera. We all know the long list of positive impacts of regenerative organic agriculture. But my question is, first off, how do you see the ROA's role? Like, how do you balance that piece of, on one side, you need to kind of certify and validate that there's true, authentic regeneration happening. And then the other side, you need to be an advocate for the quality and the positive ecological impacts and also the health ramifications of these regeneratively grown crops. So I guess my first question is like, what kind of balance do you see in terms of ROA's role between just really certifying authentic regeneration versus really building a market? How much of it do you think is on the certifying, on ROA? And then how much of it needs to be done by the farmer and how much of it can be done collaboratively?
Yeah. So we see at ROA that we are two things. One is a standard holder and a movement builder. And the standard holder is that the advantage to the regenerative organic certification is that it's a very clear, high integrity proxy for the type of agricultural practices that we need to move towards. Like we need to move away from extractive conventional agriculture and we need to move towards something. And as we think about what is the something, the regenerative organic certification, I think, sets a very clear, high but achievable bar for farms to be able to get to. And that gives a clear signal to the marketplace that if they see the regenerative organic seal on a product, that they know that it is synthetic free, that it is nutrient dense because of the soil health component of it, and it's been produced through fair wages and through a practice that actually don't abuse animals. So that is sends a very clear signal to the market. Now, that's the advantage of having a really good, high integrity, internationally recognized standard that everybody can get behind. So we want to make sure that we maintain the integrity of that standard.
Yeah, first and foremost.
And like we're here because we are actually the reason why the Regenerative Organic Alliance and the Regenerative Organic Certification got started in the first place is because we want to change the way that agriculture is done. And it needs to make sure that it's not just a niche environment, but actually this is like it is broadly adopted. And to your point, Charlie, that really needs to be demand driven. Without demand, no, producers are like, sure, I'd love to do that, but I need to know that there's a market for me to do that. And so that is a major gating factor. And so within the Regenerative Organic Alliance, I see that our number one charge is to grow demand for this movement. Without demand, we're not going to make the kind of impact that we need to make. So then the question is, okay, how do we get there? So, um, the one challenge to date is that there's still consumer confusion and not as much consumer awareness. And every brand is trying to tell their own story about this.
Right.
And one of the things that we need to be thoughtful about is not to have a fragmented message, but that there's a clear and consistent message about the advantages of what is regenerative organic. Why is it better for us as individuals from a health perspective? And why is it better for the planet? And why is it better for our communities and economies? And so at ROA, the thing that we're really trying to work closely with our brands on is to be able to tell that consistent, compelling message that will create that type of differentiation for the brands
Hmm.
that will grow that demand in the marketplace. And it's a cascading effect, right? It has to start in the retail environment, especially at the consumer level. Like if there's increased consumer demand, retailers will react. If retailers react, brands react. When brands react, they want to get more rock product. When they want more rock product, they buy more rock from rock producers. So
Hmm.
it starts with consumer, like let's really build meaningful consumer awareness. And we have this whole consumer campaign that's based on that in partnership with our brands. So our brands all have, so our drive is A, how do we get more brands to become rock? How do
Hmm.
we make sure that those brands that we do work with buy more rock? And the way that they get there is that we can help them with all their marketing resources be able to really amplify the story. And we want to give them material, data, stories to be able to go tell this awesome story out in the marketplace. And our hope is that when consumers walk into a grocery store or through their various social media feeds, be like, whoa, I'm hearing about rock everywhere. And I want more. I want more for me. I want more for my family. And that's going to get this flywheel going, like I talked about.
Yeah, that is so awesome to hear. I really like it was actually quite refreshing and I think probably really encouraging for a lot of the people on this webinar and just a lot of the growers that I work with to hear that piece that you feel like your number one charge is driving demand because I totally agree. I think that there's a growing base of farmers who want to farm in this way. And really, like you said, there's no way to grow this without growing demand. So in coordinating with all these different brands, right? You want each brand to kind of be able to tell their own story, but also tell it in a way that is amplifying the larger movement. How are you doing that? How are you working to, because in some ways it almost seems like just like creating like a not a marketing cooperative, right? It wouldn't be that formal, but really like a unified movement where there's this clear message so that consumers aren't getting confused. And obviously we can kind of dive into this later, but there's already a bit of confusion in that regenerative is also sometimes regenerative conventional. And so how are you coordinating all these brands so that they're just always communicating this clear message around, look, this is better for your health, this is better for the planet's health, this is better for the animals' health and our economy, and also what are those core messages, because there are so many benefits of regenerative agriculture, right? It's like we can go down the list and we can start slowing down around 25 or something. So what are the core messages that you're trying to drive home with consumers, and how are you trying to drive those home? Is that like partnering with retailers? Is that, there's obviously a lot of great movies that have come out over the past few years. How are you doing that?
Yeah. So one of the things that we did in the spring is basically brought a group of brands together and said, um, let us come up with a shared campaign
Hmm.
that is going to be um, that resonant with with consumers. And what are the things that we've heard consistently really resonate? And the two major things that we heard was first and foremost health, like the health benefits, and then secondarily, people are really interested about um, the planetary benefits of what this could look like. So we launched this Allies campaign in the spring, and we're really leaning into this. And this is why we just hired a brand engagement manager, and just hired a new director of marketing engagement. And so I'm going to just share my screen again. And we launched this campaign. And so this is with again, with our brands. And so the campaign is on this idea of heal the earth, nourish your life. Again, coming up with those two ideas of, hey, how do we pay attention to the nutrient density and health and safety of the food in a way that's going to benefit the earth? And then that's the rock logo for those who haven't seen it. And what we created is basically an ability for all of our brands to be able to take the Rock logo and to be able to customize it based upon their particular product, right? So, what you'll see on the left side of that, for example, that's a partnership we did with Lundberg Rice. You see the one in the middle, that's Little Bucks. So there are different brands that have taken this and like played with it so that there's a consistent message around this campaign around heal the earth, nourish your life, and then with a set of digital assets to go along with it. And then if you go to like our website, you can look at the ROA Allies campaign, and then we developed like an example movie where we did some nice product integration to really have this whole idea of like heal the earth, nourish your life. And we're going to be doing a lot more with like shorts and movie clips. And we've got
Hmm.
this really cool thing going on with Mad Ag right now because they've got all these really cool stories that they built around some Midwestern farmers that they partnered with that are sourcing our rock brands. So really trying to get to this idea of some cool storytelling through social media, through filming, and other kinds of things. And then on the retail side, also looking at ways that we might be able to do things like end caps to be able to
Hmm.
do these promotional campaigns in grocery stores like Whole Foods, Sprouts, PCC, Jimbo's, and others. We're in conversations about doing something really cool with Erewhon. So it about like really trying to get, again, more consumer awareness and using cross promotional campaigns. So this is like with some of our pantry items in an end cap, and you can see like the heal the earth, nourish your life. And you can see that we're really trying to get, again, across a consistent message of soil health, animal welfare, and social fairness that just continues to get consumers aware of and excited about what regenerative organic is all about.
That's awesome. So I think this is a great time to talk about nutrient density a little bit. I think there's so much growing momentum behind the food is medicine piece, which is kind of slightly different, but also very much linked into this idea that food grown in a regenerative organic system has higher levels of nutrients and phytonutrients and the things that actually, higher levels of antioxidants in blueberries, for example, right? What's really cool and interesting and kind of just, a quick sidebar is the Bionutrient Institute did a bunch of research and they tried to figure out what was the one thing that would kind of indicate or track with improved nutrient density. And the amount of soil life measured through soil respiration was the one kind of piece that they found. So we know that when you have a healthier soil microbiome, you end up with healthier plants. That makes a healthier, more nutrient dense crop. And then, of course, that is healthier for the person that consumes it. Do you imagine including that as like a fourth sort of staple? Like on that end cap, you had those three things. You had soil health, animal welfare, and social justice and social fairness. Could you see, or how are you going to roll out this partnership with Audacious? How are you going to roll out this data? Is this going to become like a big staple in terms of or rather a pillar of the value proposition of regenerative organic? Or is it going to be sort of just like some nice sprinkling on top of this delicious cake?
I don't think it will become a pillar unto itself because at the end of the day, it's what we are achieving that because within the context of regenerative organic, what makes it so interesting, and Charlie, we've talked about this, is that, part of the reason that the regenerative organic certification was started is because a lot of folks felt like organic was super important as a foundation, but didn't address questions of soil health. And in fact, the USDA organic allows for hydroponics. So there's a bunch of people who are like, wait a second, we're moving away from soil altogether. Let's think about a way that we can get a standard that includes soil health because of all of the benefits that come along with what you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get good soil health through that pillar, and you're able to move away from all synthetic inputs because of organic, that combination gets you to a really compelling value proposition around healthy, more nutrient dense, and safe, toxin free.
Mm-hmm.
And the Audacious partnership allows us to basically run these products through their food lab to get nutritional profiles that is able to tell a data-driven story around nutrient density and being free of chemicals and not having pesticide residue, uh,
Yeah.
which you don't get in conventional, and you also don't get in regenerative non-organic or
Yeah.
regenerative conventional. Um, so that's that we see that as a really big and important differentiator.
And are you seeing in terms of how you're going to roll that data out, is that going to be like a QR code on the back of the branded pasta? It's got the rock label on the front, it's got a QR code on the back, or like how are you best going to get, because in my view, like you said, right, it sounds like there's been the market research to see that, hey, this is healthier for you is actually the most impactful thing for consumers. And in my view, that probably is going to drive the demand the most. So how are you going to get that message out front and center? And I guess an added piece on that is I know that, especially in its initial sort of its initial creation, the regenerative organic certification was meant to be both practice-based and also outcomes-based. And we know that if you're taking care of soil, you're going to end up with higher nutrient density. So would you ever consider having nutrient density be a part of that standard? Maybe not like required levels, but I guess, yeah, take us 5 years out. How does nutrient density kind of get interwoven into this whole thing?
Yeah, again, I don't see it becoming part of the standard because I think it's an outcome, to your point.
Hmm.
Practice-based, outcome driven, right? And so we really think that this is going to be a very clear, measurable outcome that we can get science behind. Um, as far as being able to tell the story, so we have set a goal with Audacious that we will have more than 200 products that go through the Audacious Food Lab over the course of the next 4 years. And our hope is we can do a lot more with that, but we really want to try to accelerate that process. We're already seeing some like pioneering brands that are moving in that direction that are rock, and I think will soon come out of the gate with the Audacious Food Lab. And we're going to be really working closely with them on how do we do the right messaging, storytelling around it. And I think it is going to be a combination of um, information that can be shown on pack, but recognizing the fact that it's limited real estate there. So how do you get just enough to whet the appetite and talk about like, hey, it's like it's 3 times more antioxidant. Like there's one of our great partners, for example, Rock Farms is Burroughs almonds, right? And I'm not going to get exactly right, but I think that they have at least 2 to 3 times um, the amount of antioxidants in those almonds than a conventional almond,
Yep.
right? And so there's a really cool story connected to that.
Yeah.
How they're able, and so it's starting to show up in some of their packaging, but I think importantly, like I agree with you, QR code, ability to be able to like go deeper on that, the wraparound marketing and storytelling that comes around with it, the things that you're going to see on videos, the things that you can put out through Instagram. I mean, there's so many cool storytelling platforms out there right now that, and we'll talk more about this later, but we're like flirting with this whole idea of like building a whole rock star campaign,
Hmm.
which we're excited about, which will include a whole army of folks that are equipped with a language to talk about this,
Yeah.
both on the influencer side, but young college kids, for example, that want to get trained up on the advantages of regenerative organic, that can go do in-store promotions, for example, to talk about these kinds of things. So we really want to roll this out across multiple fronts, and it'll be fun to see in the next like 6 months or so, when we have a bunch of rock products that have gone through the Audacious Food Lab, how we can start to build a story around that. And, the sky's the limit in terms of creativity. Our brand engagement manager comes from Yerba Madre and Lagunitas, and he's like super creative guy out of Portland, Oregon, David Green, and he's just got like he's brimming with ideas about how to make these stories accessible and interesting and exciting. So
Yeah.
we're a lot more about let's get the data, but let's also do good data translation and amplification through compelling storytelling.
Totally. Benina's a classic rock star. So we're lucky enough we work with her and we've got some agrology sensors out in her fields. And along with that improved antioxidant level, and again, no surprise, right? Because these things they're very often very correlated and they move together. She's got, 2 to 3 times the amount of soil life in her
Yeah.
fields. And, I know that she's done a bunch of research in terms of the above ground biodiversity. You go there's birds everywhere and there's bees and there's bugs and it's a really amazing place.
And just, this isn't really talking about nutrient density, but one of the things that she regularly talks about, as you know, is she's in a hot climate, and her conventional neighbors are sometimes 40 to 50 degrees hotter
Yeah,
on ground
yeah,
than her crops because of the cover crop
totally.
she's
Yeah.
got.
And
So
it's
the impact that has on water retention and her ability to just be a lot more resilient is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's amazing. Turns out nature has already designed these amazing air conditioning units, and they're called plants. And if you have everything covered with plants, we've seen it in vineyards where it'll be 10 degrees cooler, literally like 200 feet apart. We've got this cool ROC versus fully conventional side-by-side trial down at Robert Hall. And yeah, literally 10, sometimes 12 degrees on the hottest days where it'll be, 95 in the regenerative organic, and you walk over 200 feet away and it's 106, and in wine grapes, that's a huge difference because that's the difference between desiccation and really losing quality versus, just having a hot day. Um,
Totally.
there's this really great question that kind of keeps coming up in the chat, and there's been different versions of it. So I'm going to do my best to kind of synthesize them, but it's around Price, premium, and kind of affordability. It seems like, let's see, I'll ask this one from Maurice, but there's a lot of different versions of it. But he says the retail price of Lundberg Price is roughly 3 times the other rice offerings at our local grocers. Do you research the damage that this does to the Rock brand? It makes it hard for me to promote the product when it can only be purchased by wealthy consumers. I've been forced to shift my message from affordable to a premium market, which is harmful for this growing mainstream base. And then I become the bad guy because I'm trying to help farmers survive. And there's also a few other questions around, we're talking about Sprouts markets and Whole Foods and obviously these very like premium natural food stores. How, yeah, talk us through that. On one side, I feel like I really want to advocate that regenerative growers do deserve a premium because again, like we were just saying, they're actually delivering a much better product. If your product has 1.5 times the amount of nutrients and phytonutrients, that is demonstrably a better product that is worth more. My other opinion is that I think that our food system has artificially low prices because of subsidies and because of, this really terrible and highly destructive system that the Green Revolution has created. So talk me through how can we scale this? How can we make this affordable to people while still delivering, a premium to growers or at least something that they can live on? Because we all know right now agriculture is really in a tough spot. Really across the board, I'm seeing a lot of the growers that I work with really struggling this year in particular, but really over the past, 5 to 10 years, commodity prices are terrible. So how do we balance those two things?
Yeah. These are really important questions. And again, there's no magic bullet. And you touched on some of these, and I appreciate Maurice throwing it out. Um, a few things. One is that as a grower, I agree with you and others that we need to be able to pay premium prices for this food, and it is a higher quality product, and you need to take that into consideration when you are buying food for you and your family. Um, The other thing that we've seen is that the actual market for regenerative organic is going up, while other conventional alternatives to that same product are flat or going down. I was just chatting, for example, with, and I think some of this information is a little bit confidential, so I won't say the brand, but like their crackers are like going through the roof in terms of their growth where the conventional alternative is flat and going down. So the actual regenerative organic market is moving in the right direction. So as a grower, our hope by growing demand is that we can compensate to a certain degree with some premium pricing, and it's not going to be 3x, it's going to be 20 to 30% more. But ideally also be able to get the benefits of a growing market and longer term commitments by brands that are willing to do forward contracting with these producers and give them some more assurance with regards to their crops. And so hopefully that can mitigate some of that risk associated with transitioning to rock so that you are transitioning with brands that are willing to make forward commitments, they're willing to pay a price premium, and you're in a growth category versus a flat category. Um, we talked earlier about the idea too of looking at it holistically. So it's not just about price premium, but ideally you're in a scenario where you're able to see once you've made that transition, your cost of inputs go down, your resilience goes up, you're able to use a lot less inputs. And so the overall economics can improve because of this shift in growing practices, like we were just talking about. Um, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration. And then there's the super thorny question of the true cost of food, like you were alluding to, is that we have artificially low prices for conventional food. And until we change our agricultural policies, it's going to be hard to mitigate that. And we as a society, like if we stay on the path that we're on, and this is the part that we're trying to get through consumers' head, we will destroy our planet. And so are we willing to lean into a different way of growing and be willing to pay price premiums for it? And can we actually move away from subsidies for conventional agriculture, which is artificially deflating, these
Mhm.
crops too. So it is, this we need to continue to make sure that this goes from niche to mainstream. And this is through consumer education and awareness and more brands leaning in and more brands making forward commitments and people being willing to pay a premium price. And we need better agricultural policy. So there is no silver bullet on this. But I think it does require a multifaceted, uh, you know, approach
Yeah.
to this transition.
Totally. You did a great job. That was a thorny question with a lot of different pieces in it. And I think that, like you said, that this is kind of all of our responsibility to work through. And, like you said, obviously there's a lot of work to be done on the policy front, not only dismantling the terrible subsidies that are, really deflating the price, the true price of food, and then also has all these externalities around these health consequences from everyone eating food that is full of toxins and just not good for our bodies. But yeah, it's a tricky balance to strike, right? In that we also I think it's really important that we reward farmers for this good work. And so one question that came, through on the chat and that I've had as well is there are other ways that farmers can be rewarded for at least the ecosystem benefits that they're creating. So, the one that everyone goes to immediately is like carbon credits, but there's also biodiversity credits. There's also, carbon intensity scores and some like tax benefits that can be created there. I think, soon we're going to be seeing, water retention and water credits. Do you see that as like something that a rock farmer could pursue and they can actually have sort of multiple avenues of income? They could be selling their rock goods, hopefully for a good price, maybe even a premium, and then also getting ecosystem service credit dollars? Or is that something that you kind of view as like you either do one or the other?
No, I think it's got to be all of the above. And let me to unpack that a little further in terms of this full value proposition. And incidentally, I don't think that it should be on the farmer. I think it's actually organizations like ROA and other uh, partners that can really advocate for ecosystem support services, figure out how we can get the appropriate data, be able to figure out a way that a farm could package up those services, right? That you're able to actually get baseline data, you're able to measure progress over time, and you're able to get to a place where you're able to have at least, in the case of, we were just talking about this before, but Agrology, but also with like groups like the land banking group, for example, that's thinking about how we actually collect that data and then how we package that data and then how that data could ultimately be sold as basically natural equity. Um, and so I do think that there's an avenue there. I don't think that's possible within this administration, but I think that in the future we may see more of that. And we're starting to see some of that in Europe, for example. So I do think that there are some opportunities on that. The other thing we haven't talked about, which I think is interesting to note, we don't have to go too deep down this rabbit hole, but as farms are transitioning to regenerative organic, they are able to demonstrate quantifiably greater resilience. Their ability to be able to demonstrate greater resilience could and should be able to have an impact upon insurance and
Yeah.
insurance premiums. So our ability to be able to then go package that and be able to tell that story to insurance companies that are willing to reduce their premiums for regenerative organic farms is something that I think we need to collectively work towards. The other thing that's interesting, and I mentioned Mad Ag earlier, and then they've got a group called Mad Capital, that there are these impact investors that are out there, like Iroquois Valley, like Mad Cap, like a handful of others, that are focused on being able to provide low or zero interest loans to farms that are making that regenerative organic transition. And so there, I think the regenerative organic transition lends itself potentially to not only having longer term contracts in a differentiated marketplace that's willing to pay premiums with a growing consumer awareness and demand for it, but it also has the ability to be able to reduce the cost of capital and ideally be able to reduce the cost of inputs, like all the things we're talking about, including insurance. And
Hmm.
then also be able to look at ways to be able to get these kinds of credits, water credits, biodiversity credits that come along with it. So ideally, like you mentioned, like 5 years, we're not there yet, but like you look 5, 10 years out, my hope is that we can actually go to farms with a suite
A
of value
basket. Yeah.
propositions, right? That talk about strong market demand with premiums that are sustainable, not 3x, but are sustainable. We're able to get to some economies of scale too. That's part of it. Longer term contracts, reduce the cost of inputs, become more resilient, get lower cost of capital, and be paid for credits. And I think that basket of value could really help to accelerate this transition and be able to create that kind of clear value proposition and demand that farmers need. We're not there yet, but that's certainly
Yeah.
where we need to go.
I totally agree, and I think at Agrology we've had a lot of conversations in that vein, and I think, again, if we look to nature, how does when there's a big disturbance, how does the ecosystem respond? It responds as an ecosystem, right? And so that's what we need. We can't just have like one player where it's just okay, ROA, that's going to be the thing, and that's the horse that we have to ride. It has to be sort of, I think, a basketed solution of different service providers and different opportunities and different capital opportunities, and as we weave those all together, then it becomes something that really can scale, because it becomes something where it's just like it would be dumb not to, it'd be dumb
Right.
not to pursue this
Maybe
opportunity.
we would call this quorum sensing.
Yeah, exactly. We were talking about it just the last time we were hanging out. Exactly. We need to bring the quorum sensing into the space. And, hopefully these webinars are a little moment of that type of quorum sensing. I just want to note we're at the top of the hour. We're going to keep rolling for definitely, probably 10, 15 more minutes, as long as it's okay with you, Christopher, because there's some great questions in the chat and I want to get to some of these. I want to definitely get to, Ethan has some great ones, but quickly before that, I just want to do a quick dive into fresh produce. It seems to me that there are some good premiums that are being achieved more on the kind of pasta and more processed foods, or things that are a little bit more on the CPG space. But in the fresh produce space, are you seeing some growth? Are you seeing premium? Like, it's really, really hard. I grew veggies for 10 years, and you're really kind of locked into commodity prices. How can we use the rock label and the data from Audacious to break out of these commodity markets and make it clear to consumers that uh, there's not, an apple is not an apple is not an apple, right? These different apples are actually significantly different, and maybe it's worth paying, 10% more for this one.
Yeah. So I turned to one of our great rock partners is Homegrown Organics out of Central Valley. And they've got a group of farmers that are doing stone fruit and citrus. And they are really thinking hard about these kinds of questions about how do you uh, figure out a way that you can break out of commodity pricing and you're able to tell a differentiated story and you're able to work with retailers. So I would watch that space, see what Homegrown Organics is doing because they're starting to do some really interesting things about being able to differentiate. And they, led by Vernon Peterson and a handful of other farmers that are in the Central Valley, are really starting to do some smart and interesting and creative things with regards to how they're positioning themselves in the marketplace and doing really good work with retailers. Um, the vision here is that much like when you walk into a Whole Foods or a Sprouts or at some point we're going to do this with Kroger and ideally Costco and Target and some of the other big box retailers, but that you'd ideally have like a conventional organic and regenerative organic, so that you could actually have a section where you would be able to see, oh, this is rock produce, right? And here are the advantages to it. Because of the growth of regenerative organic, and because we do have a bunch of produce um, growers, that we think that there might be a really nice opportunity to do some of that promotional campaigns. It will likely be some of those pioneering, like independent retailers that are the first out of the gate to start to do some interesting things with regards to decommoditizing uh, produce in their produce sections. And we hope that some of the larger natural food retailers will follow suit. So we really are trying to push on those early pioneers that are doing some really cool and interesting things, and looking at uh, farmers and farmer cooperatives like the homegrown organics folks about how we might be able to do more around that to be able to get premium for what that looks like. Because I'll tell you that the data and some of this, I mean, this is nascent. Some of this stuff is just coming out. So I want to be, I want to offer a cautionary note here that, we still need to test this out. We need to run this through. But that with produce in particular, you look at some of the conventional fruit that's out there, and it's basically just like sugar bombs, right? There's no nutrients to it. There's a ton of sugar and there's pesticide residue. So our ability to be able to do this with produce, I think that nutrient density against the conventional alternative is going to offer a very compelling story. I want to test that out. We want to see what that looks like, but my thought is that that's going to be a way that we can actually do that because you again look at the difference between regenerative organic produce versus the conventional, and I think it's going to offer a night and day
Yeah.
comparison where a mom or dad that's shopping for a family is going to look and be like, what, why would I buy like this sugar bomb for my kid when I can get when I can get an apple, an orange, a peach that is way more nutrient dense and less sugar filled than
Yeah.
the conventional alternative.
Totally. And there's so many interesting threads to pull. I think another really interesting one that I'm excited to explore is shelf life. I think for the retailers, I don't know, they lose what, probably $1 billion plus per year on produce that's going bad. And we've seen that regenerative organic has longer shelf life for that same exact reason, that they're not just sugar bombs. There's this diverse array of phytonutrients. We got a question here from my friend Martin Crompton from Union Grove, and there's a few questions about this. So I'll read his, and then we can kind of keep pulling this thread. But it's on sort of so his question is, how can rock and rock certified growers collaborate rather than compete with other regenerative non-rock growers to kind of create, an aggregated supply and like a clear joint message to build market demand for regenerative fresh produce? In other words, how do we avoid a regenerative versus regenerative organic sort of tribalism, which will confuse consumers and then slow down this transition to, basically just slow down the regenerative movement in general. And I know you spoke earlier that you do feel like there's a paradox in being regenerative and using synthetics. And I would generally agree that I think, we know that using conventional synthetic fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides, they all have really bad effects on soil health and human health. So, there's no debating that at this point. But how do we create a cohesive regenerative movement that does allow farmers to start where they're at and then build towards it, what, in my view, the gold standard, which is regenerative organic production?
Yeah. Great question. I just wanted to pop this on the screen real quick and can certainly circulate this too if it would be helpful. But basically, helping people understand what the differences are between these respective claims and certifications is helpful. Because again, they are different within the context of the regenerative world. I will say that we are very aligned with the organic. So organic, regenerative organic, and trying to really think about ways that we can get folks to that regenerative organic place. We also recognize that the fact that some farmers are able to start with regenerative And we are working with some third-party certified uh, uh, claims that are focused on, like the Soil and Climate Initiative and Regen Agri as a couple of examples of this, where somebody may have the certification around soil health through one of these claims, and that we're having equivalency we're building out equivalency standards with these guys so that if they have this claim, they don't have to go get recertified through
Hmm.
Regenerative Organic, but they can apply it. So much the same way with organic. Like if you've got organic, you don't have to go through a whole nother organic certification.
Yep, you've already got it.
You say you got it, and now you just go get your soil health, animal welfare, and social fairness um, standards, and then boom, you're rock, right? So we want to create these what we're calling journey to rock to be able
Hmm.
to build out a set of, much like we have with organic, these equivalency standards to be able to take every step of the way working with farmers so that they can ultimately move towards regenerative organic, but they get credit on the front end.
Hmm.
And as long as they are showing continuous improvement, that's the other big thing because we don't want folks to be like, oh, cool, we're on the journey to rock, but they actually never move away from synthetic inputs, for example. And
Yeah.
so we have a timeline. You've got to be moving towards regenerative organic within 3 to 5 years if you're on this journey to rock, to be able to talk about the fact that you are on that journey to rock. So I think that was part of the question. The other part of the question is like, how do we make sure that there's clear messaging and storytelling to the consumer, and then there's not a lot of consumer confusion? And this is, frankly, I think this is really what we need to do closely with the retailers, because the retailers are the gatekeepers on this one. And there's a lot of like regenerative language getting thrown around, and I think retailers are starting to wake up to the fact that that romance language ultimately needs to go. And in Whole Foods, for example, and Sprouts, you're not able to use like this, like just regenerative claim like through romance copy unless you've got something to back it up. Now, we believe it should be the next step, which is that actually needs to be third party verified and certified, and that there are certain claims out there that are not.
Hmm.
But in general, I think as long as we're all recognizing the fact that there's real value to third party certification and verification, that there are high integrity standards like organic and some of the other, Regen Agri or Land Soil and Climate Initiative or Regenerative Organic Certified, that we want to be working together and be able to create this journey to rock as long as there's high integrity third party standards that we can all stand behind.
Totally. Ethan has a really great, his is his first question. He got it in right as we started, and I want to circle back on it. And it's a good follow-up to that question. So he's describing how there's, all these different certification bodies. Now there's Regenified, like you said, Soil Regen, Regen Agri. It's a pretty long list, but there's, five kind of big ones. And each of those bring kind of their own unique insights, protocols, and sort of regional networks and base. Could you foresee a cooperative or integrative model where these certifications sort of interweave through mutual recognition or like aligned tiers or even, shared metrics that honor both diversity and integrity? And I thought that was a really good question. So,
Yeah, and it does build on what we were just talking about. So that's what we're doing again with this journey to rock
yep.
and through these equivalency standards. So we have a non-negotiable, which is that you have to be third party verified and certified, because otherwise you have really strong conflicts of interest at play. And I'll call Regenified out about this because at the end of the day, they are certifying themselves.
Yep.
And I think that has some challenges to it, and is not going to send a trust signal to the marketplace that, hey, there's an independent certifying body, there's an independent auditor that's actually looking at whether this farm is got the appropriate standards, et cetera. So as long as folks are third party certified and verified and they've got that level of rigor and they've got high quality standards, that is that kind of cooperative that we're talking about. Like the way I think about it a little bit is like a Girl Scout or Boy Scout sash where you build up your awards. And, at some point you become Eagle Scout, like you become the Regenerative Organic certification, but you don't have to go do your lifeguarding or your archery or your cooking badge again, right? Those
Yeah.
badges add up to what would become regenerative organic certified. So if you do, like, we recognize, like, we're doing this really cool partnership with Living Wage US, for example, around livable wage, right? You go get a certification around certain standards that we adhere to that are focused on livable wage. Boom, great. You add that to your rock certification. So you can build up a soil health certification through, like I said, a couple of different partners that we're working with, livable wage, animal welfare, and it adds to what ultimately becomes rock. And that's the kind of cooperative spirit I think that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
And we'll be announcing more stuff like that in the next, couple of months, actually.
Totally. There's a lot of plates you got to keep in the air. There's been so much amazing, commentary and questions in the chat. I'm trying to kind of sort through it all. If anyone has something that's really burning, feel free to repost your question again. But yeah, there's some great conversation going back between Maurice and Ethan. One that's interesting. So yeah, just kind of, a bit of a technical question, and not to call out Tazo, but it sounds like Tazo has a certified regenerative organic product, but it's not rock, or it doesn't mention that they call it regenerative organic, but they're not rock certified, correct?
They're not, and this is one of the other jobs that I have is that we've got this fabulous law firm called Verso Law that is a does pro bono legal work for us, and you can't legally say that you're regenerative organic if you are not regenerative organic certified.
Right.
It's sort of so
So
uh,
they're looking into it.
so they're looking into it.
Got it. Perfect. Thanks. This is a question that this was, yeah, one I came up with, and I like it. So we'll jump into it. Where are you seeing the most growth in terms of demand? Like, I guess two kind of paired question. Where are you seeing the most growth in supply? So what crops are growing the quickest in terms of rock crops? And then where is there some opportunities? Where are you seeing like outsized demand?
Yeah, first of all, I will share with you that this is a growth curve. You saw my earlier slide about the 24% growth year over year with regards to rock. We need to disaggregate that. I've asked that of my team. I'm like,
Totally.
what's growing the fastest? And
Yeah.
I still don't have an answer for that. So
Got
I
it.
have some anecdotal evidence about where we're seeing some really exciting growth. I would say like the beverage business is actually really exciting. There's a ton of stuff going on with like coffee and cocoa and shade trees, like the kind of stuff that Yerba Madre is doing right now is awesome. Wild Orchard is another one that we love that does matcha tea. So there's a bunch of really cool things. Like we're trying to work with Just Iced Tea to see if they might be
Mhm.
able to do more with rock. So there's a bunch of cool stuff that's happening in that beverage space. We've talked a little bit about um, the winery area is super fun. That's growing quickly, just because it makes a lot of natural sense on many fronts, like we've talked about. And there's some really fun stories, like what you see happening with Patagonia's Kernza beer. Like
Yeah.
they're crushing it right now, and both their fastest growing actually is their Patagonia Kernza non-alcoholic beer, their NA beer
Yeah.
is
Which again gets
doing
into
really
that
well.
health space, right? Where people people want to
People
have
are,
that beer
people are
taste
connecting those
without paying.
dots. People are
Yeah.
connecting those dots. They love the story behind why Kernza is a good cover crop and the fact that
Yeah.
they're creating a market for it, and
Yeah.
it's got a great story to it.
Yeah. It's
What
powerful.
I what gets me excited about where we're going is I mentioned earlier that we are in three categories. We're in food, but also cosmetics and textiles.
Hmm.
The textiles is really interesting and exciting. The one thing we are working on right now is being able to work through traceability. So you've got these rock producers, like these regenerative organic cotton farmers. but it goes through this whole process of like ginning and spinning and production so and then there's like there's mass balance. They get woven together, and then so it gets complicated quickly. So our ability to be able to have really good traceability that we're building out right now, and we're fortunate in the fact that Lorraine Pepper is on our board. She was the founder of Textile Exchange. She knows the textile market through and through, and so she's really leading the charge for us on this. So I'm super pumped about that. I was in Italy in June with one of our great cosmetics companies, Davines, which is a high-end shampoo lotions company. And they, and of course our founding organization, Dr. Bronner's, is doing some super interesting, cool stuff. So I'm excited for what we can do within the cosmetics and textiles arena as well, as we continue to make sure our standards can meet it. We can do the traceability. We pay attention to things like cosmetics. It's a little tricky because it's rock ingredients, but it's
Mhm.
really hard to get to that 70%. And almost like for Bronner's, like they've gotten to 95%, and they do really good work.
Yeah,
Ryan Zinn on their team's amazing, but and that
that's
whole
hard.
team. It's more complicated because you get 60 different ingredients, and
Yeah,
some is
things
never
are
going to
really
be rock,
complicated.
but
Yeah.
we're doing some interesting things in that arena too.
Cool. Well, I got two more questions for you, and then we'll let you go. Thank you so much for your time, though. One is from Kyle, and he's asking, how can we as growers collaborate on marketing efforts more strategically? Could ROA help facilitate more market working efforts and kind of, masterminds or group efforts on that so that people, because like you said, I think there's right now there are so many different everyone's kind of telling their own story around regenerative, and hopefully everyone's doing a good job with it. But how can we kind of collectivize that effort a little bit more?
Yeah. So short answer is absolutely. We would love to be able to work with a group of farmers to think about ways to get that group of farmers to market. Um, Farms, as everybody knows, has like different channels, right? Some farms are going direct to consumer, some farms are going through brands, um, and or direct to retail. And so I mentioned homegrown organics, like that's a grower cooperative that came together and basically put a brand on it, and now are growing their market share because they've got this really good marketing engine and sales engine. Same thing with O Farm out in the Midwest. It's a
Mhm.
group of about 120 plus farms in the Midwest. They're the largest organic grower cooperative, I think, in the country, at least by acreage. And they've got this really cool marketing arm, and we're now working closely with O Farm to look at ways that we can get more of their product into market in collaboration and coordination to be able to help to stimulate the transition to regenerative organic. So yeah, we would, yes, and I think the idea is the more that farmers are actually already working in cooperatives, we can be able to support that more efficiently. And we do try to see ourselves as a matchmaker as much as we possibly can. And I will caution, we're a small and mighty team. We've got 23 team members, and we're stretched pretty thin. We're going to do the best we possibly can. And I'm trying to raise more resources. If anybody on this call is actually a funder and a philanthropist that actually would like to go and support this regenerative organic movement, we're all ears, because I'm trying to grow more capacity to be able to do this kind of matchmaking, drive demand, build the team to be able to make sure that we're actually really creating these opportunities for farmers, because that's what this is all about.
That's awesome. You guys do incredible work. You're a very small but very mighty, mighty team. So, last question here is just how are you seeing interest from kind of that? We know oftentimes they talk about the missing middle in the regenerative supply chain. Are you seeing more interest from, food companies like Dole, Del Monte, all those kind of CPGs, or not necessarily CPGs, but food companies in the middle? I know there's a lot of growing excitement on the retail end. Yeah, tell us about that kind of middle segment.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're getting at is like sort of the distributors out there,
Yeah.
and we definitely see interest because they're getting interest from retailers. Like, hey, can you guys start to source more regenerative organic? And so the distributors are paying attention to that. And like we did this cool thing with KeHE, for example, in Chicago, where we're able to have like a bit of a regenerative organic visibility with them. Um, UNFI, like those are some interesting partners, I think, for this movement, and we want to do more with them because those distributors play a critical role
Yeah.
in this work. And so the more that we can educate them on what regenerative organic is, the more that they can actually represent and they can do more throughput. And it's all part of that same demand conversation we were having because it's that entire we've got to pay attention to this the entire supply chain and be able to really help farms get to a place where farmers do their best work on their farm and being able to create amazing product and so our job is to be able to help get that product so that it's sold. And the distributors are part of that. The brands are part of that. The retailers are part of that. That storytelling is part of that. So it goes right back to the beginning of our conversation, which is demand, demand, demand. And the more that we can drive that demand through awareness, I think is really going to stimulate the market in really exciting ways and provide more and more economic opportunity for farmers.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, Christopher. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated this super, I think authentic and meaningful conversation. And last time we were hanging out, we were nerding out on quorum sensing, which, if anyone doesn't know, in soil, once you get up above a certain threshold of diversity and life in your soils, the soil kind of flips into a different mode where all of a sudden microbes that were maybe antagonistic and competitive become collaborative, and everyone falls into this place where the entire soil web of life is this giant sensing organ, and that they're all communicating with each other and moving resources, and it's this thing called quorum sensing. And so I hope that this webinar was a little bit of a moment where we can push towards that quorum sensing, above ground with these two-legged animals that are walking around. And yeah, Christopher, I just really appreciate your leadership at ROA and your entire team. You guys are doing amazing work. So thank you so much for your time. I will send a follow-up email with the recording to everyone, and we will also send some of Christopher's slides over. Yeah, any other parting thoughts, Christopher?
No, just thanks for the people who showed up and took their Friday afternoon and morning and wherever they are in the world to join us. Hopefully, you came away stimulated. We would love to have you join our community. We are sending out regular sort of updates and everything else like that. So if you go to our website, regenorganic.org, there's a lot of good information there. And like you said, Charlie, we'll send out a deck that would give people a little bit more information about what we're up to, and just really appreciate you hosting, leading us through a really stimulating conversation. And I got a lot out of it too, so I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. All right. Well, I hope everyone has a great Friday afternoon or morning or wherever they are, and a great weekend. And we will be talking soon. Bye, everyone.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.